Okay, just before we begin, I'm just gonna say, just please, before I just get into the first question, uh, could you just please tell us about your background? Who is Dr. Sonibare? And yeah, so the first question I have for today's show is Mhlaba Foundation, formerly known as Thope Foundation. What prompted the name change, and how does it reflect the growth of your mission?
Okay, so my name is Rethabile Mashale Sonibare, and my current role is the managing director of Molo Mhlaba NPC. I grew up in Khayelitsha in the 80s and 90s, and I have a very varied history in terms of education. But essentially, I have always been in alternative education. I went to a private school in the late 80s and 90s. So you can imagine the state of South Africa and what that meant as a Black child coming from the township, commuting into a historically white institution. And then I matriculated and went to the University of Cape Town and I studied social work because one of the sort of big questions I had as a young person growing up in the township is how do we do differently? How do we do differently in education? And how do we bridge the economic divide between the haves and the have-nots? And so that sense of injustice has always been kind of the driving force behind my work, behind my education, and behind the current role that I hold. So I studied social work all the way up to master's, and I focused on policy and management in my honors and master's year at UCT. And because I was not tired of historically white institutions, I then moved to Stellenbosch University, where I did my PhD also in social work and in policy and management. And I followed my supervisor to Stellenbosch because I met a gentleman who really believed in a sense of social justice and what the social work profession could do in being an agent of change in that space. And in that process, of course, I started my family. I got married, did all the kind of nice life things that you do in your late 20s and 30s. Um, and in 2012, I started an organization called Thope Foundation. And I had been working prior to sort of while I was studying and doing my work, because of course, as Black people, we don't have the luxury of just studying. You also have to work to pay your Black tax. I had been working in public health with a focus on youth development. So how do we prevent HIV from spreading amongst young people? And then what does the research tell us? And then how do we design programming that is impactful for the context in which we work? And that job or those jobs actually took me across Southern Africa, and I got to work in many, many countries and see many, many different kind of landscapes from urban to peri-urban to rural, and the challenges that youth face. But it was, I always had the sort of female lens or gendered lens to the work around the role of girls and the roles of women as being the biggest burden bearers of HIV. Yeah, so in 2012, Thope was started, and it coincided with work that I had done in 2010 for the World Cup around young people and getting young people to be multipliers of impact, is it basically. Um, and that organization was formed solely to give girls something to do in the afternoons, right? So how do we get girls to be proactive in the afternoons? In every township, you see boys kicking the ball in the streets. Then you're hanging out on the street corner. There's a development league for young boys, the under 10s, the under 16s, the under what, the first teams. But there's very little available for girls. And so Thope Foundation was really a response to that. And how we get girls actively involved. How do we mitigate and reduce teenage pregnancy? And then how do we prevent girls from being HIV positive? And the programming design that we used was to say, you know what? We can't talk about HIV in the sense, the people have HIV fatigue. We can't talk about sexual reproductive health in the way that we do because everybody's tired. Young people don't want to hear it. They want to know where the next opportunity is coming from. Where's the next job? How do they break the cycle of poverty for themselves and for their families? And so Thope offered robotics and coding classes for girls, and it grew into a tutoring program and then evolved into something quite massive that we hadn't anticipated it would be. It was essentially supposed to be little program, keeping girls busy, a few girls in Khayelitsha doing, interesting things. Um, yeah, it turned into a full-blown organization that was serving 500 young people across 16 primary schools in Khayelitsha. And we then started working with mothers because we realized that actually women are the gatekeepers of opportunity for young girls because they parent based on what they know, they parent based on their history, that girls come home, they wash the dishes, they clean the house, they do the laundry, they look after younger siblings, and their place is not in the world, it's in the home, and I'm a strong believer that a woman's place is everywhere. And so that's how it started. And it evolved. So we ran it, and then in 2016, the big question was, where to from here? We know the after school program is significant. It's huge. We're teaching children the curriculum because the tutoring actually turned into schools in schools. We were teaching the curriculum to get kids ready to go into high impact schools when they left our program. And those high impact schools required the kids to have at least 70% curriculum coverage to be able to pass the entrance exam just to get into those high schools, never mind university. So the big question was where to from here, and where to from there was let's start a school and let's take some of these elements that we know work, that we've proven over the years work through the after school program and turn it into a school. And that's how Mhlaba was born. So we did a lot of research around models, around curriculum, around cost, around teacher training, around localizing and indigenizing curriculum for our particular context. And in 2017, we secured a building. It was a very nice building because we had aspirations of being this like massive private school in Khayelitsha. And we wanted the building to speak to what we were trying to achieve, right? So success for us looked like the right infrastructure for the right education for the right school. It wasn't going to be a container building. It wasn't going to be a shack. It was going to be what success is embodied, right? So yeah, in 2018, we opened our doors to first 4 girls that grew to 35 by the end of that year. And I guess the rest is history. Here we are in 2025 operating our schools.
Yeah, it's such an incredible story. I mean, you hear all these people, Susan Wasana, in an interview with Peniel the Black Pen, talking about building schools in the post-apartheid era, trying to shift the narratives or the policy and regulation that have not been, or the curriculum of education that has not been actually removed since then, because we're always learning about the history of what we were told history of what Africa is all about. Um, and I think it's an incredible shift in actually trying to change the whole scenario, the whole way of how we Africans should start thinking about ourselves, starts changing or starts equipping ourselves with skills that are actually going to be impactful in this century we're in 2025.
Yeah. So, I mean, the challenge and I think the biggest injustice with the South African education system is that we watered down history, right? We diluted down the true history and we looked at history from the Western gaze and we allowed that to be the mainstream curriculum because I think if we had been teaching a Pan-African idea or been teaching African history as core to the curriculum, we would have a lot more uh, young people that have an African solution to an African problem mindset, right? So looking at how we grow Africa as a continent, we sort of live in an era or in a world of cognitive dissonance, right? So in the one hand, we're saying we want to aspire to the West because the West is developed, the West is this kind of symbolism of what economic freedom looks like. Everybody has houses, they have cars, they have jobs, they have access to healthcare, they have access to quality education. And we forget that most of those countries were never colonized, right? In Africa, we have a situation up until 2025, where there's still massive pillaging, has just been formalized as ownership and kind of economic investment and foreign direct investment into African countries and African continents. So we sit with this kind of binary of who we are as a people, and we almost blame the young people, and we almost blame Africa for its problems, but actually we forget to look at where those problems emerge from. Africa was doing just fine before it was colonized, right? And no one wants to tell that
True.
story. The good story
Because
that is always,
yeah,
yeah.
because like I was having an argument with someone, and I was also checking some bit of background in terms of what I was actually saying about this conversation I'm having with this person. So I'm saying it's actually a parent or someone, I'm not sure, but we're having a conversation of what I'm saying every child should learn about entrepreneurship, should learn about business, should learn about um every child under the age of 10, you know, 10 years old, 11, 12, 13, should learn about how to start a business, pitching, all those things.
Mm.
And someone might say, that's child labor. But
Mm.
the whole, but in school, the whole day, but at the whole day, you're at school, 18 hours a day, you're at school, not 18 hours, maybe 12 plus hours a day, you're at school, holding a pen, running, kicking a ball, but you're not learning about the crucial things that are actually important, that are actually, because I was actually looking at this school, Indian school in South Africa here in Durban. At a young age, all these guys are learning about entrepreneurship. Grade two,
Mm.
the kids, when they come out of matric, they're proper businessmen, and you wonder why all these shops that turn out to be supermarkets, big shops, and after generations and generations, you don't understand the concept of preserving wealth and multiplying wealth, creating
Yeah,
wealth,
yeah.
financial
So maybe this is
education.
this is probably a good segue for me to talk about Molo Mhlaba schools and our curriculum and what we do here, because I think it might answer some of, or it might give input into the conversation you were having. So when we decided on Molo Mhlaba, we decided on a particular curriculum. It's a 100-year-old curriculum from a woman out of Italy called Maria Montessori. And it's called the Montessori philosophy of education, right? And there were a number of reasons why we landed on that and not any others. Um, Partly because it breeds independence, it breeds curiosity, but it's also value-based education. So how do we teach morality and values within the classroom without having, Bible studies or, anchoring it in a particular faith base? And they are inherent in the curriculum is a sense of mastery for children, right? The materials are designed for children, so they spend very little time with workbooks and worksheets. They spend a lot of time learning through doing. What we now are calling play-based education, using Legos from Sweden to to teach kids. But it essentially builds in that sense of autonomy, that sense of independence, that sense of self that I can do and that I alone am capable, but in a group I am even more capable because there's a collective power and a collective justice. Um, and then the second component was designing our project-based learning around what Montessori offers. So we looked at coding and robotics, sort of the skills for the fourth industrial revolution. So how do we turn robotics, coding, all of this kind of fun, lovely stuff that we talk about in industrialized nations? How do we turn that into a way of thinking and a way of being, and making it mainstream, right? Mainstream in the school where it's not an extra curriculum and it's not a social club. But it is a subject that we offer. We've been offering it to 3-year-olds up until 12-year-olds. Um, then our grade threes have a program called Girlpreneur, where we actually teach them to think of a problem in their community, put it down on paper, so ideate the problem, then design a solution for this problem, and then implement it, right? And part of the implementation is investment. How do we raise capital for this work? If you're going to start a business that responds to a social issue, you need to raise capital. And they pitch these ideas to what we sort of call angel investors. But essentially, it's a kind of a dragon's den approach to entrepreneurship, and they run these businesses within the school environment at the age of 8. They get investment, they report on it, they talk about profit. And part of it is really thinking about the future of work and what it means, because for the longest time, for centuries, Black bodies have been used as sites of labor, right? They've not been the means of production. We've never been put in positions where we are actually in control of the means of production. Our labor has been quite cheap. It's been commodified. It's been transported around the world to be able to serve wide interests. And what GoPreneur does is it reframes the mind in a very early age that as a young child, I am capable of building a business that can actually succeed. And that business can create employment for the future. It can create revenue for me. It can create a profit for me and my family so that I am able to interrupt this generational loop of poverty and generational like worklessness and underrepresentation. So I fully agree with you, but I think we're a long ways away from changing an education system that's got 12 million children in it, you know? But we as a school have a strong commitment, and we have a strong commitment to making sure that girls understand that they can lead, that they can be the ones that break the glass ceiling. There's absolutely no reason why the next JSC CEO cannot come from Molo Mhlaba. There's no reason why the next Einstein cannot come from Molo Mhlaba. There's absolutely no reason why the next president cannot come from Molo Mhlaba, because it built into our system is what we're trying to achieve around leadership, because leadership is not only about position, it's about attitude, it's about mentality, it's about social networks. It's also about the inherent ability to think independently, create ideas, and then and motivate people to follow, to influence people in the direction of your ideas. So, yeah.
You hear a lot about Orania, segregated people, Afroforum. Do you think that Pan-Africanism, Black consciousness, Black movement has the potential to reshape how Black youth perceive themselves, especially in the context of education, opportunity, and identity?
Um, you know, I struggle with modern day Pan-Africanism and Black consciousness, particularly because it's reactive, right? So we react to the Oranias of this world, react to the Afri-forums of this world, we react to a failed economy, we react to political parties that talk about the I don't know, the complications around expropriation of the economy and land, and we've been set up as reactors, and we forget to create. We forget to create ourselves, and we forget to put ourselves in the world in terms of ideas, in terms of what we're doing, because we're constantly competing with a moving ball. And that moving ball you might find is not even that excellent. It's very mediocre, right? Like people launch in beta all the time and they perfect later as they learn and as they build the movement. Yet we feel as a nation or as a Black kind of collective that we need to be perfect before we can launch it, right? It needs to be so excellent. It needs to be so great. Yet the standard is forever changing, and we don't set our own standard. And that's why I struggle with it. And so for me, in the work that we do, I see all of those as distractions from the common goal, right? So the goal is much bigger than being a person. I mean, we talk about our STEM curriculum, and I always say, we must be creators of this technology. We cannot be consumers of, artificial intelligence. People were going crazy on social media a couple of weeks ago with these, turning yourself into a cartoon character. And now it's like, why are we all so happy with being consumers of this thing? We have no idea of the ulterior motives, the agendas. Why are we not creating technology for ourselves? Why do we not have a cell phone, a South African cell phone? We are the most digitally connected continent in terms of cell phone usage, almost everywhere, and even in rural areas, people have got cell phones. But why is there no cell phone that speaks to who we are? Cars, transportation. We're sourcing all of that from the West. Why? It's because we're reacting, and we've become consumers basically, and we forget to create. And so the work that needs to happen now is, how do we look inward and say, this is who we are as a people, and these are the problems that we're facing, and these are the solutions that we're making, and making sure that those solutions are authentic and true to Africa, rather than going, oh, well, the Chinese are doing that, the Americans are doing that, the British are doing that, the Germans are doing that. Yes, it's nice to know what they're doing, but they're doing it for themselves, and they're creating this large market that buys because, we're Africa as a continent is populous and it has money. It's a cash-based economy, so it's quite easy um, I mean, if you think about M-Pesa, right? Like in East Africa, like it's an e-commerce thing, and it was an idea that came out of a Kenyan that grew into East Africa, and then angel investment came, and now it no longer belongs to Africa. It's just Africans are consumers of it. So those kinds of things, and I think we get so distracted by the noise of these others that we actually forget. We forget who we are, and we forget what we need to be doing. The work must be done, and we must do it with ourselves in mind. So how do we imagine ourselves into history, and how do we imagine this new African in the world? And what are the things that we need to do to be able to make sure that we achieve that objective, rather than responding, reacting, and constantly being on the defense about what we are not doing properly, what we're not doing well.
You know, I was just thinking, most people think politics is it the solution is because you might argue and say MK, Jacob Zuma, that people say is funded by a Durban elites monarchy or guy or somebody, and the ANC is funded by all these parties. You look at the history of banking coming from British and being imported here in this country with central banks and I'm just looking at how the business elites actually really control and influence, are we in a matrix? Are we supposed to be going out for all these guys and be shifted and I don't know how to put it, but can there be a solution towards this issue we're facing in terms of unemployment rates without, or should we include should we bring Ibrahim Traore? I'm
Um,
just
that's such a big question, but I think we forget that politics has two sets of morals, and so do politicians, right? They have the public demeanor of what they say and what they stand for that will win them votes. And then they have what they are mandated to do through their party funding, right? So and none of that is in the interest of the masses, right? It's always in the interest of the political elite. And while I think that there is a place for politics in society, I think there is also a place for divergent ideas outside of politics that hold politicians to account. And, one of the biggest challenges I think we're seeing now as a country is these little parties that are eroding the political belief, the political moral fiber of what that means. I think from a legislative perspective, we need governance in every country. We need a public official appointed to stand as a leader, whether you call it a president, a prime minister, or whatever, a CEO of the country. And I do think that sometimes those people in those positions need to be held accountable, but they cannot be held accountable by other politicians, and they can't be held accountable they can't hold themselves accountable. And so I think the challenge is that young people are unattracted to politics, right? If you look at politicians, if you look at our parliament at the moment, how many young people are there versus our veterans, politicians? If you look across Africa, I mean, I think there are 3 countries with very young presidents. Oh no, there are 5 countries with very young presidents who are doing revolutionary things, and most of it comes from West Africa, right? So, and their ideas and beliefs have become very Pan-African and what's considered Black consciousness, but actually they're not. They nation state focused. They're going, we're going to fix this country that's been pillaged and sort of rummaged by whoever, and we're going to fix it first in the interest of our population, and then we're going to look outward. And that becomes unattractive, right? Because who funds who funds politics? The people that have benefited from mining, that have benefited from the economy, that have benefited from banking. Have you tried to register a bank in South Africa? I mean, it's the hoops you have to jump through, the capital you have to be able to do that. I have the privilege of traveling Africa, both in my work and in my personal life. And, the largest chain stores in African countries are ShopRite and Spar. And who owns those, right? So like wherever you go, like if you shop at ShopRite, you are the black elite in many countries. Our cell phone providers in those countries are MTN and Vodacom, banking, Standard Bank is there. While I have no problems with brand expansion, I have a problem when it's at the expense of the general population and squeezes out local competition. So I think that's the big thing. And so when we look at politics and politicians specifically, we have to always have that lens of we, the people, the electorate are not the masters. Our job is to hold them accountable and to make sure that they deliver on the promises that they make to the people. But at the end of the day, until we can finance politicians and political parties ourselves in the interest of ourselves, we're not going to lose this battle. I mean, we're not going to win this battle. So yeah, I think
I think,
I
but
hate to
I think
sound as if I'm being very pessimistic. I'm not being pessimistic. I think there's a role to play, but I think we're not asking the right questions, and we're not in the right spaces, and we don't have the right checkbooks to be able to get people to do the right things. And so we have to use other ways. We have a very big culture of protest, but our protests have become violent and inward, right? We protest, we burn our own clinics, we burn our own hospitals, and we forget that these people we're protesting against don't use those facilities. They're not even bothered that the clinic has burned or that the school has burned down. We need to be protesting in Sandton at the JSE. We need to be sitting at the kind of Chamber of Commerce and saying, we will shut this place down if you do not comply. And so, yeah, that's
yeah,
kind of
but
my two cents
at
on
least,
that.
that's an interesting, but yeah, I think this conversation should be happening. People who have mass following should start actually using their social media platforms, actually start speaking about these things, and we actually need leaders like yourself who are going to be educating young South Africans, young Black South Africans, because I'm sure there'll be leaders there who'll be in politics and start to actually say, no, you know what? Because I want to get into the Molo Mhlaba Foundation now, and how it focuses on empowering young girls, and what are some of the psychological and emotional tools you equip them to combat this sense of inferiority.
So Molo Mhlaba, I mean, at its core, we call ourselves a network of Pan-African private schools for girls. And we use sort of psychology in the way we engineer our spaces. So, for example, we're firm believers that you cannot be what you cannot see, right? Children need to see examples in the world, and they need to see themselves in the world as those examples. So our classrooms, for example, are named after women who've done amazing things in history, in politics, in media, in literary studies, in the academy. So we name our classes after Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, the first female president on the continent, Winnie Madikizela Mandela and her sort of leadership journey in holding the ANC together while Mandela wasn't present. We've got Brenda Fassie, a Cape Town musician who did amazing things using struggle songs to advocate for the case of South Africa and apartheid, the anti-apartheid struggle. We've got Noni Jabavu, one of the first women to publish novels. And so we have a huge array of people who we name our classrooms after. And while the girls don't know those people when they come into their school, they learn the patron, they learn the name, they learn the person, who they were, they learn the biography, and they learn the professionalism and the conduct of that person and their contribution to history. And I think that's the first thing of going, oh, wow, I'm actually in an Ellen Johnson Sirleaf class, or I'm in a Wangari Maathai class, or I'm in a Queen Nandi class, and this is what it means to be in a Queen Nandi class. I'm born of a warrior, I bred a king, you know. So we start to engineer that. And then even in the assemblies and the conversations that they have, we always have to anchor stories with Black protagonists, right? So we curate our libraries very diligently and very deliberately. We make sure that in the stories that they see, if we're talking about space and astronomy, they are seeing Black astronomers, whether they be South African or from anywhere in the world. If we're talking about a mathematician, they must understand that's who they are. Because, you know, I mentioned that we do not want to be a reactive school. We are creators. And part of creating that psychological wellness and that psychological growth is actually just making things available and making sure that that's the common language that we have as a school, as an organization, and a sense of I can, right? I can do it. I can, I've seen it. Somebody else has done it. They had the same challenges growing up. They grew up as an orphan, or they were in a bad marriage or whatever, but that they were able to be triumphant in their circumstance. And so that's a big component of our DNA. There's cultural artifacts in our classrooms where there's a physical picture of the patron of their class, and they see it, the name of the class when they introduce themselves. We don't go, I'm grade 1B or I'm grade 2B. You know, we don't have that. You just say, I'm from the Queen Nandi class, I'm from the Wangari class, I'm from the Winnie Madikizela class, I'm from the Nonto Zimgweto class. And you know, it's the common language. And people are like, but what is your grade? And they're like, oh, I'm in the 69. What is 69? You know, and people are like, that's the Montessori part of who we are, as the vertical age group and the blended blended grades and age groups. Um, so we're very intentional about that. Our curtains, we make sure that our curtains, you know, the art that we have, our curtains are made from shwe. Our values speak to our Ubuntu-ness, our Africanness, and what we need to do in the world. And those values are translated into everyday assembly, and that's how we hold children accountable. Have you been kind today? Is this a sign of integrity, what you've done? You know, is this a sign of Ubuntu? Is there sisterhood in this and what you've done? So for us, that's rewiring the brain rather than going, that's bad. You've been so bad. This thing is horrible. Or you know, it's so unlike, you know, we use our values as ways to reinforce the behavior we want to see rather than punish the behavior we don't want to see. So that when a child steps out of line, they understand that that's not the Molo Mhlaba way. Um, and there's a psychology in that. So it's sort of neuro-linguistic programming around what do I know immediately as my true reality? What am I trying to aspire to in the bigger world? And how do I translate that into action, right? So all of the things that we do from as young as 3, we take our kids in at 3, and we have a common language around who we are as an organization. And by the time they get to grade 7, they know exactly who they are. They don't need to be told by the world who they are. Yes, there's influence from social media. Yes, there's influence from peers outside of the school. But at their core, they should be able to know exactly who they are. And that's the psychology of engineering the brain into what you want rather than what you don't want.
It's amazing. It's amazing. And just closing off, what message would you give to young South African women, particularly in those who feel disconnected from their heritage or lack of confidence in their cultural identity?
It's quite a big one, but I think, you know, it starts with you. It starts with you, the person having the interest and curiosity and seeking the information and seeking the answers, but you need to be asking the right questions, right? And I think young people have become quite complacent. They're waiting to be told what to do. They're waiting to be given an opportunity. And actually, sometimes there is no waiting. You just seize the opportunity and say, well, here I am in the world, and this is what I look like. This is what I want to know. And you ask the question. And you should not be intimidated by what you don't have, right? Like if you come from a family that is poverty stricken, that has very little resources, and the next person comes from a house with 2 public servant parents, a house, cars, you know, that does not make them anything. Talent is the equalizer. Your ability to seize the bull by the horns is the equalizer, not the opportunity or the circumstance of your birth. So I think for me, that's the biggest message I have for young people is understand who you are and what you want to achieve, and then go out into the world and ask for it. And you'll be pleasantly surprised, like so pleasantly surprised. There's so many times where I have asked in rooms where I was like, there's no chance I'm going to get this, but I'm going to ask. The worst they can say is no. And oftentimes they go, wow, you're so bold, you're so audacious. You were going to say yes, because how do we say no now? So putting yourself in those places and just asking and taking, right? And taking and not waiting to be given. Those are if we can get young people doing that, I think we'll see a different caliber of leadership coming out.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to have a conversation with me and just take your time. And yeah, I'm just so grateful for this interview.
No, it's a pleasure. Look what happens when you ask, Langelihle.